everyone. We are the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. As ever, I am Dr. Erin.
And I'm Dr. Kristen.
Welcome back to our continuing coverage of Netflix's The Crown. We're in season 3. Today we are talking about episode 3 called Aberfan. And this was a tough one, everybody. This was a tough one. I also said offline just now that this episode is the reason I love The Crown. Like, this was a beautiful episode of television.
Yep.
Just bear that in mind for when you watch our episode 4 video next week, because I will not be as generous. But this one starts out in 1966. For those of you that maybe just found us, we will not be doing step-by-step recaps of these episodes. That's not our jam. We do kind of thematic overviews. We talk a lot about character development and plot arcs and that kind of stuff. And we are also, in this particular season, talking a lot about the fact that the show is not talking about Northern Ireland. That is because we both got our PhDs in Northern Ireland. We are both experts in various areas of the prolonged ethno-sectarian conflict that lasted in Northern Ireland violently from 1968 until 1998, roughly. It is now a mostly political conflict, but there has been significant levels of violence even since then. So, big deal, big thing that happened in the United Kingdom that is not talked about in this season of The Crown. So every episode we are starting with telling you what was going on in our beloved province of Northern Ireland. So the Aberfan tragedy and disaster happens in 1966. Again, things are happening in Northern Ireland. There's a commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the Easter Rising, which was tense and very politicized, not overtly violent yet, but things are starting to move. We are having a burgeoning civil rights movement modeled after the civil rights movement in the United States that is advocating for equal rights for the predominantly Catholic population that had been discriminated against since 1922. So things are happening, nothing very big. Still, I think that would warrant an episode dedicated to it or a conversation. It's certainly something Harold Wilson would have been aware of and working on. It's certainly something we believe Her Majesty would have also been briefed on.
Yes.
There was growing political movements and political figures. The emergence of Ian Paisley starts to happen more vocally in 1966 as he shows up at demonstrations. He becomes a leading political figure in Northern Ireland. So things are happening. Nothing that we feel like should have overtaken, obviously, what happened in Aberfan, which was a horrific and horrible slurry accident that killed 144 people, 116 kids. I thought the show handled it brilliantly. I thought their storytelling of what happened to this village was just heartbreaking and wonderful.
One of the true strengths of storytelling like they took in this episode is the ability to show so many different facets of pain.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, Aberfan is one of the tragedies in British history that is largely popularly understood as something that could have been prevented.
Right.
And so this isn't a natural disaster that, came out of nowhere. The people of Aberfan had been warning the National Coal Board for the research I did last night said about a decade about their fears for that particular peak, not only because it was 5 times the height of regulation,
right,
but so the regulation is 20 feet. That one was 111.
Mm-hmm.
And also the natural springs that go underneath it. So the amount of rain also that was happening in the beginning episodes, like we lived in the UK, like that's not abnormal either. Like it's not no, that's not how heavy it rains every day. Like when we talk about living in the UK where it rains every day, it doesn't rain like that every day, but it rains like that every month.
Yeah.
So I don't buy this, like, oh, we couldn't have predicted it. No.
And that's documented and historically. So I think for this episode, it appears they stuck pretty closely to the historical record, which you would hope that they would, of something of such national importance both to Wales and national importance to the United Kingdom on two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in terms of that, I mean, I will always find it interesting. I know, Erin, you do too, the times in which Peter Morgan chooses to diverge from history and the times in which he chooses to become very, so like in the spoiler, in the next episode, he diverges almost entirely from the historical record versus this episode in which he stuck, as far as public record is concerned, stuck very closely to the public record.
Right. Like we know that the Queen didn't visit for 8 days. We do know that Lord Snowden went and took pictures. We know that Philip was there for the memorial. Like all of this was accurate to what was actually happening. Yeah.
And because he stuck to the historical record, I mean, this is me, he was able to explore the emotional facets of things so much differently than when he posits fiction.
Like manufactures.
So there's, you know, for me, there were 3 particular narratives about Elizabeth that I found really interesting. So the first is this whole she can't cry, which we'll come back to.
Yeah.
The second is what is the crown's role in these kind of tragedies. And the third is the one that I have been chewing on the most. I actually called my dad and told him all about it because I thought it was so interesting, was the conversation she had with Harold Wilson about how that the people of Britain only know the versions of Wilson and the Crown that they present.
Right.
So like we are never authentically known. We are never fully known. But my dad, who is anyone who hasn't joined us, is the president of our parent company. And he is in the process of stepping down and passing it on to my brother and I. And so we spend a lot of time talking about leadership. Mm-hmm. And he and I were discussing, how do you balance the need to, you know, all of human relationships are manipulation on some level. Right. So how do you balance that need?
Yeah, we're all performing versions of ourselves in all manner of situations, with our parents, with our kids, with our coworkers, when we're out in public in the grocery store line.
And for leaders of like that level, so, you know, with people whose international eyes are on them, he has a very crafted persona, which the little I know about Harold Wilson surprised me 0%.
Yeah, I thought it was fascinating though that but not at all surprising, because we know a lot of politicians downplay their or upplay their working class roots.
Yep.
For political benefit, even when they, like, I just think of President George W. Bush here, who like played up his Texas southernness, but the kid went to Yale.
Yeah.
Yale? I think it was Yale.
Yeah, it was Yale. He was a Yale man.
Yeah. So like, and had grown up like in a super hyper privileged world, but ran on this like everyman, I own a ranch in Texas persona that is part of who he is, because he does own that ranch and he does love to live that life. But that is just part of who he was, and that was the part he was emphasizing for political gain. Yeah.
And so the question I think when we talk about leadership with Abby Research becomes, how do you balance the need to be performative and the balance and the need for authenticity? Because we know all the data says that no one wants to work for a company anymore that isn't authentic.
Right. But what does authentic even mean if we're all performing all the time anyway?
Exactly. So what is it? A constructed authenticity? Is that going to come back and bite us in the butt in 10 years when the culture shifts again? Like, I mean, my dad and I were on the phone for like an hour this morning, chewing that all out, trying to think about, and he came of age in corporate America in the 80s. And so his idea of leadership is much closer to Wilson's. And so I found that, like, for me, the whole episode was worth it for that 5-minute conversation, outside of getting to the children singing in the beginning was like, here's the knife. Like, I knew what was going to happen. Maybe there's a lot of viewers who don't know what Aberfan was, so they didn't know, but like, oh my.
Like, I feel my heart broke for anybody watching that episode that didn't know what was coming.
Yep.
Like, before this season, I'd never heard of Aberfan, which tells you a lot, because I lived in the UK for 5 years. But as an adult, not as a young person, I'm assuming, I don't know that it's part of education or national history of that level. Certainly I have several Welsh friends who would know a lot about Aberfan. But that's it for me, because I knew I'd read a recap of the episode. I'd seen an interview with Olivia Colman talking about how hard it was to film. And so I knew what was coming, but I feel so bad. If anybody watching this out there did not know that slurry accident was coming, I'm sorry, because I knew it was coming and I was still just like devastated to watch it happen. But I do think they gave so much space to the town and to the grief.
That town meeting was incredible.
The funeral for 81 children. And this is when the cinematography that Peter Morgan loves to do, like, pays off in spades, right?
Yep.
The half a minute long shot of the caskets was just devastating.
Perfect.
Like, devastating.
If he doesn't submit this one for the Emmy, he's an idiot.
Yeah.
Like, this needs to be this episode is what should win him an Emmy for directing.
For directing, 100%. And because I know a lot of people on the Twitter were freaking out over the last scene where the Queen is listening to the recording of that hymn. It's a hymn, yes?
It's a hymn, yes.
I wanted to use the correct term. And the one shot where she cries. The thing that was interesting for me, it was with this emotional element to Elizabeth, was where I have a hard time divorcing the actor from the person.
Yeah.
I know Olivia Colman as an actress. I know I've seen lots of interviews with her because I love her. She is a very emotional person. She cries very easily, much like myself. I think she's a very empathetic human. I remember when they were filming this episode, she was talking about how difficult it was for her, how she sat in a room and cried and then had to like wipe her eyes because she had to go through this whole episode not crying.
Yeah.
Thinking about what was happening, what they were representing on film, not crying was like one of the harder things to do. So I was looking at her acting in these scenes and it looked like to me she was close to crying the whole time.
Yeah.
And then when she was like, oh, I wiped a bone dry eye, I was like, no, girl, your eyes were glistening.
Yeah.
And then at the end, obviously, she's listening to the hymn. So for me, that kind of took me out of it because I was like, it looks like my imaginary friend, she's not my friend. It looks like Olivia Colman is going to cry, but the Queen is not crying. So that was interesting. I did not see that plot line coming that she can't cry. I thought the point they were going to make was more this like public persona of the Queen. She is Elizabeth Regina. She's not supposed to be emotional. That's inappropriate. I did not see this revelation at the end coming that Elizabeth Windsor as a human does not cry. But the point I wrote down that I shared offline with Dr. Kristen that I thought was really, really interesting was that she has been told her whole life since she was 12 and she knew she was going to be the Queen or whatever, that she has to be more than human. She literally is more than human because she is anointed by God. And they went through that a lot in the first season. They talked about that in the coronation episode a lot. So like, I was just thinking about watching this, the impact that kind of language has on a person. Like, she has had the human trained out of her.
Yep.
So to me, it made total sense that she like doesn't cry. But then she said in that revelation to Wilson, it goes back to like before she was being trained to be the crown.
Yeah. And that would be interesting to know if that piece is fiction or not.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, like, you and I joke all the time how famously I no longer cry. Because like if I cried about anything, I would cry about everything. And so I've just kind of, I don't cry. And it's, I can see that almost being a subconscious choice she started to make when everything got too big, that like in childhood development, there was too much. there was just, her brain couldn't, she couldn't do it. And so her brain was like, we're shutting this part down.
Yeah, because like imagine being a 12-year-old and going to see like hospitals with Blitz victims.
Yep.
You've got dead bodies, you've got horribly maimed and disfigured bodies of people who were injured in the Blitz, crushed by buildings, limbs blown off. Like you can just imagine what that looked like. And so your fight or flight response kicks in, and maybe she just shut down.
It would be the most relatable thing about her, I'll be honest. Yeah. If that's like, yeah, and I think about like, she wasn't allowed to cry then. So if she was queen now, we would expect her to cry when she goes. But in 1912, when she's 12 in like the 40s or whatever, she couldn't cry. So it's like, we're also facing an evolution of what we want from our public figures, which is something you and I have talked about. She's never understood and is deeply uncomfortable with the fact that the world is different than it was when she was born.
Yeah, and I think that's, I mean, they didn't really talk about it in this episode. They talked about the difference between like displays of public emotion culturally when like her undersecretary was like, we're going to Wales and it's much more appropriate to, so
that
like,
was fascinating.
Yeah, the difference culturally between like certainly parts of like England and or English culture versus Welsh culture, which is interesting. And I think that's what they're trying to do in episode 4 without revealing too much, is talk about a monarchy that is struggling to change with the times, or struggling to understand its place in a 1960s UK, particularly in the economy, which they talk about in episode 4. But yeah, there was a lot in this episode. It was really meaty, and I was like, this is why I love this show. And then I watched episode 4 and I was like, this is why I don't love this show.
This is why this show is stressful.
This is like, it was a roller coaster, these couple of episodes. And as we are filming this right now, I haven't seen anything past episode 4.
No, I stopped at episode 4 because that was our plan, because I didn't,
So I don't know what's coming, except I know it's not Northern Ireland. That's the only thing I know about episodes 5 through 10.
It is not about Northern Ireland. So before I forget, when you brought up All Things Bright and Beautiful, little bit of trivia. Yes, it is a Victorian era hymn that was written in Wales as an ode to Wales. And it was written by a woman named, I had to look up her name because I forgot. Her name was Cecil Alexander.
Great name.
And she was the wife of the Archbishop of Armagh in Northern Ireland.
Gway.
So it's All Things Bright and Beautiful is like one of the, she calls herself an Irish poet, by the way. So we'll link to a story in the show notes where the house that she stayed at while she was writing that went up for sale. And so you can see some pictures of what she was talking about.
Wales. She wrote it in Wales?
In Wales. She wrote it at a house in Wales with a Aberfan.
Sure.
I can never pronounce Welsh.
Yeah, Aber must be, forgive any Welsh language speakers out there, Aber must be a preface that means something much like that.
It means valley.
Oh, maybe, because like there's Aberystwyth, Aberfan, like lots of.
I feel like one of our Welsh friends said that to me once. I can hear his voice.
Like for those of you, like place names are always really interesting to me, but like Bally in Ireland is castle.
Yeah.
Town. No, sorry, Bally is town.
Yeah.
So like anything is Bally, something that Bally preface means town. It's bastardized from or anglicized, but also bastardized from the Irish Gaelic. But so it's Aber is an interesting one to me.
So, and All Things Bright and Beautiful is largely kind of considered one of the British national hymns. They have Jerusalem is a big one. All Things Bright and Beautiful. There's a couple that are kind of sung at state funerals. I would imagine this hymn will be performed at Lizzie's funeral when she dies. Especially
given the fact that like the research that I did afterwards indicates that even the afterword of the episode the epilogue kind of, I forget what it's called when they put up that stuff, the words at the end. There's like a term for it. I'm just gonna call it the epilogue. That said, this was the way she reacted to the Aberfan tragedy was one of the greatest regrets of her monarchy, and that appears to be true, that she still feels that she mishandled that. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it was sung at her funeral by a choir of Welsh children.
Oh, maybe that will break me, actually. Maybe I will. That might break me.
If they don't have that idea, I'm going to send it to Buckingham Palace right now. If that's not written into the plans for her funeral, it should be.
I mean, small children singing hymns is one of my kryptonites.
Yeah,
so.
And I thought it, and you know a lot more about this than I do, but I've learned in the last few years that there's a huge tradition of choral singing in Wales.
Huge. It's one of the places that a lot of our modern choral traditions actually come from.
Yeah. So I loved that was included in this episode. That felt really authentic. And like a love letter to Wales a little bit, just by including, I don't know if the children were actually supposed to sing.
I don't know, but it would not surprise me because it would have been the last assembly before half term, which is always, even now, the last assembly before half term is always a bit of a deal. Yeah. So like it wouldn't surprise me if that was the case. So and yes, if anyone else would like to experience other versions of Welsh singing, we would like to introduce you to a movie called Pride.
Yay! I think it looked like the same town. I think all Welsh coal mining towns look the same, but it looked like the exact same town that they filmed Pride in.
No, I mean, I think because there's the BBC studios right outside of Cardiff, so it wouldn't surprise me if that is the Wales stand-in. So.
I was like, oh my God, it's the same town as, I forget what the town was in Pride that they was based on, but yes.
But they sing the actual national hymn of Wales, which is Bread and Roses, in that song, in that movie. And we'll link to the movie in the show notes. And yes, Wales is always a place I want to learn more about. So I'm always grateful for the opportunity to encounter their people and their stories.
Yes.
Overall, if I was ever going to pick an episode of The Crown to tell people why they should watch this show, this would be one of my top 5.
This would be one of them. Yeah, there's been a couple throughout the first 2 seasons.
Yep.
But I'm telling you, this one was good. Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, this will be on the Emmy reels, I'm sure. So
yeah. For a lot of things, sadly, not necessarily. I don't think for Olivia Colman. She did some fantastic acting in this, but not a lot. She wasn't present a lot.
Yeah, no, I think actually her work in the 4th episode is stronger. So
yes, which we will get to next week. But I think we've talked through Aberfan.
Yep.
We'll have lots of links in the show notes to reviews and fact checks for this, and some information about all things bright and beautiful.
Yes. All creatures great and small.
All things bright and beautiful, and the movie Pride if you're looking for some more Welsh content in your life, or just joy.
Yeah.
That movie
can't recommend that one enough.
Yeah, we talked about it during our Pride Month video series, so I'll make sure to include that link to that as well. But for now, that is episode 3 of The Crown. We will see you all next week for episode 4. I'm Dr. Erin.
I'm Dr. Kristen.
We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.